The morning was quiet, but the tension was thick in the air. I walked into the room, the familiar scent of leather chairs and old books surrounding me. My heart pounded, my palms sweaty as I took my seat. Today was the day the will would be read, and with it, a chance to finally understand where I stood in this family. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I had lived under their shadow, been overlooked, underestimated. Today, I would find out just how deep that shadow ran. It started long before this moment, of course. My father had always favored my sister Maya, the perfect daughter. Always polished, always poised, always the one who could do no wrong. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough. From childhood, I was the one who didn't finish things. My paintings, my ideas, my dreams, they were abandoned halfway, discarded in the wake of Maya's success. At family gatherings, when I spoke, my father would interrupt me, cutting me down mid-sentence. "You never finish anything," he would say, his voice dismissive, as though my words were worth less than the air they took up. My mother? She was always too busy to notice the cracks in our family. She was too absorbed in her own image, in her own life, to care about the undercurrent of hurt I felt every time I was brushed aside. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, to smile through the pain and go along with whatever they expected of me. And Maya? She wore success like a costume. She never had to try. My father's eyes lit up when she walked into a room. He called her the daughter I can rely on, as if I were invisible. And yet, when it came down to it, I was the one who showed up. I was the one who handled everything when the bills piled up or when my father was too tired to make decisions. They expected me to pick up the pieces, but they never acknowledged it. Every time I spoke up, every time I tried to voice my own opinions or needs, they dismissed me with a wave of their hands. "You can handle it, Anna," they'd say, as if it was just another task for me to take care of, as if my emotions, my well-being, didn't matter. And I complied. I always complied. But that was before today. Today, as I sat in that sterile attorney's office, I wasn't that girl anymore. I had spent years collecting the pieces of my story, silently building a case for myself. I had everything documented. The receipts from the hospital visits, the countless hours spent taking care of my father, the emails from my grandfather that made it clear I was meant to inherit the lake house. I had nothing but the truth on my side, and it was time for it to be heard. They thought I was weak. They thought I was too broken to fight back. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I had been collecting the evidence of their wrongs for years, and today, it was time to finally face them. It was time to take back what was rightfully mine, to expose the lies they had lived by for so long. The will was the final act, and I would be ready. The room fell into a heavy silence as Mr. Lell began reading the will. My father, sitting beside Maya, exchanged a brief, knowing glance. Their eyes gleamed with the kind of confidence that comes from rehearsing their roles. I sat alone, the familiar sting of being invisible creeping up on me once again. The attorney's voice echoed in the quiet room, but it felt distant, like it wasn't meant for me. He moved through the formalities, speaking of charities and bequests. Then he reached the part I had been waiting for, the part that I knew by heart. "The lake house shall pass to my granddaughter, Anna Hart, and her heirs." I exhaled, my fingers gripping the armrests of my chair, but as he continued reading, my heart sank. The next line came, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. The lake house was no longer mine. The deed had been altered, the legacy erased. They've already rewritten me, I thought, my mind racing. I hadn't expected it to happen like this, in front of everyone. But now, the truth was clearer than ever. I had been nothing but a footnote in their version of the family story. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the moment sat heavily in my chest, squeezing tighter with each passing second. I looked at the document in my hand, the words swimming in front of my eyes, but they were all a blur. The lake house wasn't mine. My grandfather's last wish was no longer valid, replaced with a cruel, calculated twist that erased my place in this family. The sting of it cut deeper than I had imagined. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything. All the years of being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed all boiled down to this moment. They had made their move. They had rewritten my story. I sat frozen, my eyes fixed on the attorney, trying to process what had just happened. My father, sitting smugly next to Maya, exchanged a look with her, one that made me feel even smaller. The smile on his face was a victory smile, one I had seen countless times growing up. He had won, again, and once again I had lost. The attorney's voice cut through my thoughts, but I barely registered his words. The meeting was nearing its end, and I had to act quickly. As the room buzzed with murmurs of congratulations to my father and sister, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had been simmering for years boiled over. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let them do this to me. The drive home was a blur. I didn't speak to anyone. The quiet hum of the car seemed to echo louder with every mile. I needed space. I needed time to think. More than that, I needed a plan. This wasn't over. Not yet. But how could I fight back against a decision that seemed so final, so wrapped up in their smug confidence? I thought about my grandfather, about the lessons he had taught me, how to stand up for myself, how to fight for what was rightfully mine. But this felt like a battle I had no chance of winning. And yet, in the stillness of the drive, something inside me clicked. It wasn't just about the lake house or the inheritance. It was about my place in this family, about how they had always treated me like an afterthought, like I wasn't enough. The years of passive neglect, the way they had always made me feel like the second choice, it all came rushing back. I was done being quiet. I was done being the one who always stood on the sidelines, waiting for approval that would never come. I had to be smart about this. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into submission again. The will was just the beginning. They had underestimated me, and now it was time for me to turn the tables. Over the next few weeks, I started collecting everything. The emails my grandfather had sent, all the documents that proved I was meant to inherit the lake house, the letters, the receipts. I knew every detail mattered. I kept track of the dates, the signatures, the times, everything that could be used as evidence. I set up a system, a folder full of evidence, a timeline that detailed every interaction, every document, every small moment that might count. I also started paying closer attention to my family's behavior. Maya's polished updates, my father's dismissive remarks, the way they all spoke as if I wasn't even there. I started documenting it all. I would never let them tell me I didn't matter again. The real work began when I started reaching out for help. I found an attorney who was willing to take on my case, someone who understood the complexities of inheritance disputes. We began to piece together a strategy. There were gaps in their story, inconsistencies that would never hold up in court. I started to realize that they had left a trail of mistakes. The will, the signatures, the witnesses, all of it could be contested. But it wasn't just the legal battle I was preparing for. It was the emotional battle as well. I had to come to terms with the fact that exposing the truth would change everything. My family would never be the same again. I would never be the same again. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't keep letting them write my story for me. As I sat with my attorney going through the details of my case, a sense of calm began to settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control. The fear that had once held me back was gone. It was replaced with determination, with a quiet strength I didn't even know I had. I remember the first time I walked into the courthouse. The smell of old paper and leather, the echo of footsteps on the hard floors. It all felt surreal. It felt like the beginning of something that could change everything. And it did. The day of the hearing arrived. I stood at the back of the room, watching as my father and Maya sat in the front row, their faces a mask of false calm. They thought this was just a formality, that they had already won. But I was ready. The documents I had collected, the timeline I had built, the evidence I had gathered, it was all in place. I wasn't there to plead for mercy. I wasn't there to beg for a place in their family. I was there to claim what was rightfully mine. When the judge called for questions, I raised my hand. The room fell silent. "Can you confirm the time of execution?" I asked, my voice steady, controlled. The attorney checked the document and frowned. "It lists only the date," he said, his tone unsure. I nodded, my heart racing, but my voice unwavering. A missing hour is still a place on a map. You can stand there and measure distance in every direction, I said. My words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything I had endured. It wasn't just about the lake house. It was about my life, my truth, and today I was finally letting it be heard. The court session was a blur of voices, rustling papers, and the murmur of murmured conversations as I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The realization hit me all at once. I was doing it. I was finally speaking up, standing my ground. It was as if everything in my life had led to this single moment of reckoning. I couldn't afford to hesitate now. If I faltered, if I gave them even a fraction of my fear, it would be over. This was my chance to take back everything they had stolen from me, everything they had brushed aside for so long. The attorney, Mr. Lell, was still standing at the front of the room, looking through the paperwork in his hands. My father and Maya exchanged glances, a subtle but unmistakable shift in their expressions, something I had been waiting for. My sister's smile had slipped just enough for me to see the unease creeping in. She was always so composed, always the picture of control. But now I could see the cracks in that facade, and I felt a small victory rise within me. Mr. Lell began speaking again, but his words were drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. My thoughts were too loud. I had come prepared for this day, but as I stood in that room, looking at the faces of the people who had never believed in me, I realized I was no longer the same person who had walked into that attorney's office weeks ago. I had become someone stronger, someone who had spent days, weeks, and months building the case to expose the truth. The will that my father and sister had concocted was not the truth. It was a carefully crafted lie meant to erase my existence in this family. It was meant to rewrite the history, to make me a mere footnote in their story. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. Not ever. I glanced over at my father. His eyes were cold, calculating, but I could see the faintest trace of discomfort in his expression. He knew the game was up. He knew I was no longer playing by their rules. And yet he held his ground. He always did. He had spent years making me feel small, making me feel unworthy of the things I had worked for. But that was before today. When it was time for me to speak, I stood taller than I ever had. My voice was steady, unwavering. I have proof that my grandfather's will was altered, I said, my words slicing through the tension like a knife. The lake house was always meant to be mine. His words were clear. I have the emails, the letters, the receipts to prove it. And most importantly, I have the truth on my side. I watched as my father's face turned pale. The same smug expression that had been there only moments ago was gone now, replaced by something I had never seen on him before. Fear. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. But my sister? She was different. She always had been. Her perfect mask of calm and control didn't falter. Instead, she tilted her chin as though challenging me. "This isn't the time for games, Anna," she said, her voice laced with thinly veiled condescension. "You're embarrassing yourself. This is a family matter, not something to fight over in court." But I wasn't going to let her dismiss me again. I wasn't going to let anyone tell me I didn't matter. "It's not a game, Maya," I said, locking eyes with her. "This is about respect. This is about the truth. And I'm tired of being erased." There was a long pause as I waited for the judge to speak, as if the room itself needed time to absorb the gravity of my words. The attorney who had been assisting my father and sister looked down at the documents in front of him, his fingers tapping nervously against the stack of papers. He had clearly underestimated me, just like the rest of them. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "It seems we have some inconsistencies here. Mr. Lell, you're going to have to address these discrepancies. Until then, I'm suspending any further distribution of the estate." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, the judgment in their eyes. But I stood my ground. I had done the work. I had followed the rules, gathered the evidence. This was my fight, and I wasn't backing down. In the days that followed, things changed. The court's ruling had shaken the foundation of everything my father and sister thought they knew about me. They had thought I was weak. They had thought they could control me, silence me with their dismissals and underhanded tactics. But they had been wrong. The legal battle continued, but I no longer felt like I was fighting alone. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence that I had collected worked in my favor. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me for so long. As the court proceedings drew to a close, the final verdict was delivered. The will my father and sister had put forth was deemed invalid. The original will, the one that clearly stated the lake house would pass to me, was upheld. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had won, not just the house, but the respect I had always deserved. When the judgment was announced, my father said nothing. His face, once so full of pride and control, was now a mask of defeat. Maya's practiced smile faltered, and for a moment I saw something there. Something close to regret, though she would never admit it. It didn't matter, though. They had lost and I had won. But the victory wasn't just about the property. It wasn't about the material things. It was about my freedom. I had taken back my voice, my power. For so long, I had let them define me, but not anymore. The day I stepped into the lake house, I didn't feel like I was claiming a prize. It wasn't a trophy. It was a promise I had kept to myself. The house was mine, yes, but more than that, I had reclaimed my place in this world. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the person they could dismiss and erase. I had taken control of my story, and that, above all else, was my victory. As I stood there, looking out at the water, the weight of everything I had endured seemed to lift. The past was still there, but it no longer had the power to define me. I was free. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace.